In the heart of a bustling city, surrounded by towering buildings and cobblestone streets, stood the Grand Royal Palace. It was a place steeped in history, where centuries-old traditions mingled with modern life. The palace gardens were always alive with visitors, from curious tourists snapping photos to families enjoying picnics under the shade of ancient trees. But no matter how lively the surroundings became, one constant remained: the royal guards. These guards were like living statues, standing tall and motionless against the backdrop of the palace's golden gates. Clad in their iconic crimson tunics and towering bearskin hats, they seemed almost otherworldly. Their faces were expressionless, their posture perfectly straight, and their eyes fixed ahead, as if nothing could distract them. To the outside world, they appeared untouchable, symbols of strength, loyalty, and unwavering discipline. Yet beneath those stoic exteriors lay ordinary men and women who had stories of their own. Every morning, before dawn broke, the guards would gather in the barracks to prepare for their shifts. They polished their boots until they gleamed, adjusted their uniforms to perfection, and rehearsed their movements with precision. Each step, each turn, and each salute was practiced countless times to ensure it met the highest standards. It wasn't just about looking the part. It was about embodying the role they played in safeguarding the monarchy and upholding tradition. For many, the guards were mysterious figures. Tourists often whispered among themselves, wondering what went through their minds as they stood there for hours on end. Did they get bored? Were they allowed to blink? Some even tried testing their resolve by making funny faces or waving wildly in hopes of eliciting a reaction. But the guards remained steadfast, never breaking character, earning admiration and respect from those who watched them. Despite their imposing presence, the guards weren't immune to human emotions. Beneath their stern expressions, they felt pride in their duty, but also moments of fatigue and longing. Long hours spent standing still could be grueling, especially during scorching summers or freezing winters. Still, they persevered because they believed in the importance of their role. They knew they weren't just protecting a building or a family. They were guardians of a legacy that stretched back generations. What most people didn't realize was that these guards came from all walks of life. Some had grown up dreaming of serving their country, while others joined out of a sense of adventure or obligation. Each guard carried a unique story, whether it was about leaving behind loved ones to pursue this noble calling or overcoming personal challenges to earn their place in the ranks. These stories made them relatable, even though few ever got the chance to hear them. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting golden light over the palace grounds, the guards continued their silent vigil. Children pointed at them in awe, parents snapped pictures, and couples posed nearby for romantic photos. Life buzzed around them, yet they remained still, like anchors amidst the chaos. Little did anyone know, however, that beneath their disciplined exteriors lay hearts capable of warmth, kindness, and unexpected acts of humanity. And soon, those hidden qualities would begin to shine through in ways no one could have predicted. On a bright and sunny afternoon, the palace gardens were bustling with activity. Families strolled along winding paths, children chased butterflies, and the sweet scent of blooming flowers filled the air. It was one of those rare days when the royal family opened parts of the palace grounds to the public, allowing ordinary citizens to catch a glimpse of the grandeur they had only seen in photographs or on television. Among the visitors was a little girl named Emily, her curly hair bouncing as she skipped ahead of her mother, her tiny hands clutching a freshly picked daisy. Emily's wide, curious eyes landed on one of the guards stationed near the rose bushes. He stood perfectly still, his tall frame accentuated by the towering bearskin hat atop his head. To Emily, he looked like a character from a storybook, a knight guarding a magical castle. She tugged at her mother's hand and asked, "Mama, why doesn't he move?" Her mother smiled softly and whispered, "Because it's his job to stand still, sweetheart. He's protecting the palace." But Emily wasn't satisfied with that answer. She tilted her head, studying the guard intently. After a moment, she stepped closer, her small feet crunching against the gravel path. The guard noticed her approach but remained motionless, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Undeterred, Emily reached out and held up the daisy she had been carrying. "Here," she said in a voice so earnest it could melt even the hardest heart. "This is for you." For a split second, the guard hesitated. Protocol dictated that he maintain his composure at all times, never acknowledging distractions or breaking character. But something about Emily's innocence and the sincerity in her gesture struck a chord within him. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he bent down just enough to accept the flower from her tiny hand. As their fingers brushed briefly, a flicker of warmth crossed his face, and he offered her a subtle smile. The kind that reached his eyes but didn't disrupt the calm demeanor expected of him. The crowd around them noticed the exchange. A few people chuckled softly, while others snapped photos, capturing the tender moment between the stoic guard and the bubbly child. Emily beamed with pride, clearly pleased with herself for making the statue come to life, even if only for a moment. Her mother thanked the guard warmly, and Emily waved goodbye before skipping off to explore more of the garden. Later that evening, during a quiet break in the barracks, the guard recounted the story to his fellow officers. At first, they teased him good-naturedly, calling him Daisy Man and pretending to sniff imaginary flowers. But as he described the way Emily's eyes had lit up when he smiled, there was a collective pause. Many of them had experienced similar moments, small interactions that reminded them of the humanity behind their roles. One of the older guards, a seasoned veteran, leaned back in his chair and said thoughtfully, "You know, sometimes it's okay to let the mask slip a little. Those kids, they see us differently. We're not just guards to them. We're part of the magic of this place." His words lingered in the air, resonating with everyone present. That night, as the guard tucked the daisy into the pages of his notebook, he couldn't help but feel grateful for Emily's unexpected gift. It wasn't just a flower. It was a reminder that even in the most rigid roles, there was room for connection, for moments of genuine warmth that transcended duty and tradition. And unbeknownst to him, this small act of kindness would inspire others to follow suit, paving the way for more heartwarming encounters in the days to come. The story of Emily and the guard spread quickly through the palace, like ripples in a pond. By evening, it had reached the ears of nearly everyone in the royal household, from the kitchen staff to the senior officers. During dinner at the barracks, the guard who had accepted the daisy recounted the moment with a mix of pride and amusement. His fellow guards listened intently, their initial teasing giving way to thoughtful silence as they reflected on the power of such small, human gestures. One of the younger guards, Thomas, found himself particularly moved by the tale. He had always been taught to maintain an unshakable demeanor, to never let emotions or personal inclinations interfere with his duties. But hearing about the daisy and the child's innocent joy made him wonder if there was more to being a guard than simply standing still. Could he, too, find a way to connect without compromising his role? His opportunity came sooner than expected. A few days later, the palace hosted a charity gala, an elegant affair attended by members of the royal family, diplomats, and philanthropists. The grand hall glittered with chandeliers, and the air buzzed with polite conversation. As part of his assignment, Thomas stood near the library, ensuring order while guests mingled nearby. It was then that he noticed Prince Henry, the youngest son of the king, struggling to carry several heavy books across the room. Prince Henry, known for his love of literature, often borrowed volumes from the palace library to read during quiet evenings. On this occasion, however, he had overestimated how many he could manage. Balancing the stack precariously in his arms, he shuffled awkwardly toward the exit. Seeing the prince's predicament, Thomas hesitated. Protocol dictated that guards should remain passive unless directly addressed or summoned. Yet something inside him stirred, a desire to help, even if it meant bending the rules slightly. Taking a deep breath, Thomas stepped forward. "Your Highness," he said respectfully, his voice steady but warm, "may I assist you with those?" The prince looked up, startled at first, then relieved. "Oh, thank you," he replied with a grateful smile. handing over half the stack. Together, they walked to the door, exchanging light conversation about the books. Thomas learned that Prince Henry was particularly fond of historical biographies, while the prince complimented Thomas on his dedication to duty. When they reached the prince's quarters, Henry turned to him and said sincerely, "I appreciate your help, truly. It's not every day someone steps out of line to lend a hand." Thomas nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and nervousness. "It was my pleasure, Your Highness," he replied before returning to his post. News of this interaction traveled fast, reaching the ears of senior officials and even the king himself. While some were concerned about potential breaches of protocol, others saw it as a refreshing reminder of the humanity shared between the royal family and their protectors. King George, upon hearing the story, chuckled softly. "Perhaps our guards are learning that kindness doesn't undermine discipline. It enhances it," he remarked to his advisors. For Thomas, the experience was transformative. What started as a simple act of assistance became a lesson in balance, how to honor tradition while embracing compassion. Over the following weeks, he noticed subtle changes among his fellow guards. They began greeting each other with warmer smiles, sharing stories of their own encounters with visitors or members of the royal household. These moments, though fleeting, created bonds that went beyond rank or title. And so, what had begun with a little girl's daisy blossomed into something greater, a shift in perspective that rippled through the ranks of the royal guards. It wasn't about abandoning their roles. Rather, it was about finding ways to make those roles more meaningful. Each guard carried the memory of that day in their hearts, knowing that even the smallest acts of kindness could leave a lasting impact, not just on others, but on themselves as well. Winter arrived, wrapping the palace grounds in a soft blanket of snow. The air was crisp, and the frosty mornings sparkled under the pale sunlight. It was a magical time of year, especially for visitors who came to see the palace adorned with twinkling lights and festive decorations. Families bundled up in scarves and gloves wandered through the gardens, their laughter mingling with the distant sound of carolers singing traditional holiday songs near the gates. Among the guards stationed outside, one stood out, not because of his uniform or posture, but because of his quiet demeanor. This guard, named Samuel, had always been known for his calm and thoughtful nature. While his fellow officers joked and teased during breaks, Samuel often kept to himself, humming softly under his breath when he thought no one was listening. His voice, though rarely heard, carried a richness that hinted at hidden talents. On this particular afternoon, a group of carolers gathered near the palace entrance, their harmonious voices filling the cold air with melodies of joy and goodwill. Tourists and locals alike stopped to listen, some joining in while others clapped along to the rhythm. As the music drifted toward Samuel, something stirred within him. He had grown up singing in his church choir, but years of disciplined silence as a guard had pushed that part of him into the background. Now, surrounded by the warmth of the season, he felt an unexpected urge to join in. At first, Samuel only mouthed the words silently, careful not to draw attention. But as the carolers launched into a lively rendition of "Deck the Halls," he found himself humming along audibly. Then, emboldened by the festive spirit, he began to sing softly, his deep baritone blending seamlessly with the chorus. A few bystanders noticed and turned their heads, surprised to hear such a rich voice coming from one of the usually stoic guards. Encouraged by the smiles around him, Samuel sang a little louder, his voice adding depth and emotion to the performance. For a brief moment, he wasn't just a guard. He was part of something bigger, connected to the people and the season in a way he hadn't felt in years. The carolers welcomed his contribution, gesturing for him to step closer and join them fully. Though hesitant at first, Samuel eventually moved a few steps forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with the singers. The crowd grew larger as word spread that one of the royal guards was singing. Even members of the royal family, including Queen Eleanor, paused to watch from a nearby balcony. Wrapped in a woolen shawl, the queen leaned against the railing, her eyes fixed on Samuel. When the final note rang out, the audience erupted into applause. cheering not just for the carolers, but for the guard who had dared to break character. Afterward, Queen Eleanor sent a servant to invite Samuel inside for hot cocoa. Flustered but honored, he accepted, bowing deeply before following the servant into the warm palace. Over steaming mugs, the queen thanked him for sharing his gift. "Music has a way of bringing people together," she said kindly. "You reminded us all that even those tasked with protecting tradition can also enrich it." Samuel left the meeting feeling lighter, as if a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted. That night, back in the barracks, his fellow guards ribbed him playfully about his newfound fame. But beneath the teasing lay genuine admiration. They saw how a simple act of courage, of letting go of rigid expectations, had touched so many hearts, including their own. From then on, Samuel became known as the Singing Guard. Though he returned to his usual duties the next day, standing tall and silent in the snow, there was a new spark in his eyes. He had discovered that breaking character didn't diminish his role. It made it richer, reminding everyone that behind every uniform beats a human heart capable of spreading joy in unexpected ways. Princess Charlotte was not your typical royal. At just 10 years old, she had an adventurous spirit that often led her into mischief. Whether it was climbing trees in the palace gardens or sneaking cookies from the kitchen, her energy and curiosity were unmatched. The staff adored her for her kindness and playful nature, but they also knew to keep a close eye on her, especially when she ventured outside with her loyal dog, Max. One rainy afternoon, the skies opened up, drenching the palace grounds in a steady downpour. Most visitors had sought shelter indoors, leaving the gardens quiet except for the patter of raindrops against leaves and cobblestones. But Princess Charlotte, undeterred by the weather, decided it was the perfect time to fly her new kite, a gift from her uncle. Clutching the string tightly, she ran across the slick grass, laughing as the colorful kite soared into the gray sky. Max bounded alongside her, barking excitedly at the fluttering fabric above. For a few moments, everything seemed magical. The wind tugging at the kite, the cool rain soaking through her boots, and the thrill of being outdoors despite the storm. But then, disaster struck. A sudden gust of wind pulled the kite out of her grasp, sending it sailing toward the edge of the garden. Without thinking, Charlotte sprinted after it, her feet slipping on the wet ground. She managed to grab hold of the kite's tail, but the momentum sent her tumbling. With a cry, she landed awkwardly, twisting her ankle beneath her. Pain shot through her leg, and tears welled up in her eyes as she sat there, clutching her injured foot. Max whimpered beside her, nudging her hand with his nose as if trying to comfort her. Nearby, a guard named James noticed the commotion. Stationed near the garden gates, he had been keeping watch over the empty pathways. When he saw the princess struggling, he didn't hesitate. Breaking into a jog, he made his way to her side, his boots splashing through puddles. "Your Highness," he called out, concern etched on his face. Kneeling beside her, he gently asked, "Are you hurt?" Charlotte sniffled, pointing to her ankle. "I think I twisted it," she admitted, wincing as she tried to move. Without another word, James scooped her up carefully, cradling her in his arms as he carried her back toward the palace. Max trotted faithfully behind them, his tail wagging despite the rain. As they walked, James spoke softly to distract her from the pain. "You're very brave, Your Highness," he said with a reassuring smile. "Not many people would chase a kite in this kind of weather." His words coaxed a small laugh from Charlotte, who wiped away her tears with the sleeve of her coat. By the time they reached the entrance, she was feeling calmer, though still sore. Court officials rushed to assist, murmuring about protocol and whether the guard should have intervened so directly. But Charlotte wouldn't hear any criticism. "He saved me," she insisted, looking up at James with gratitude. "Please let him stay for tea." And so, against all tradition, James was invited to join the princess for tea in the grand sitting room. As servants bustled around with trays of sandwiches and warm scones, Charlotte chatted animatedly about her adventure, occasionally giggling at Max's antics as he shook water droplets onto the carpet. James listened patiently, offering a few polite comments when prompted. Though visibly out of place among the opulent surroundings, he couldn't help but feel touched by the princess's genuine appreciation. From that day forward, Charlotte developed a special bond with James. Whenever she spotted him on duty, she would wave enthusiastically or ask how he was doing. In turn, James found himself looking out for her during his shifts, ensuring she stayed safe while still allowing her the freedom to explore. Their friendship became a testament to the idea that even within the rigid structure of palace life, moments of connection could blossom, and sometimes those moments could change lives forever. The palace was alive with laughter and chatter as the royal household staff gathered in one of the grand dining halls for their annual celebration. It was a rare occasion, a night when titles and ranks faded into the background, replaced by camaraderie and shared joy. Servants, cooks, footmen, and even some junior members of the royal family mingled freely, exchanging stories and enjoying plates of delicious food prepared especially for the event. Among the attendees were several royal guards who typically kept to themselves during such gatherings. They stood near the edges of the room, leaning against the walls or sitting quietly at a corner table. To most, they still appeared reserved, almost out of place amidst the lively atmosphere. But tonight, things were about to change. A mischievous young footman named Oliver had been watching the guards all evening. He admired their dedication but couldn't help noticing how they seemed to hold themselves apart from the festivities. Determined to bring them into the fold, he approached a group of guards with a playful grin. "Come on, lads," he said, holding up a deck of cards. "You can't spend the whole night standing there like statues. How about a game of charades?" At first, the guards hesitated. Games like charades required expressions, movements, and spontaneity, things they rarely allowed themselves outside of duty. But Oliver's enthusiasm was infectious, and after some coaxing, they agreed to give it a try. The room erupted in cheers as the guards joined the circle, rolling up their sleeves and loosening their ties just enough to feel a bit more relaxed. When it was the first guard's turn to act out a clue, the tension in the air dissolved into bursts of laughter. His attempt to mimic a famous historical figure turned into an exaggerated performance that left everyone, including himself, gasping for breath. Another guard tried to portray a popular movie character, flailing his arms dramatically while his teammates shouted wild guesses. Even the usually stoic James, who had once carried Princess Charlotte to safety, surprised everyone with his comedic timing, earning applause and pats on the back. King George, hearing the commotion from a nearby corridor, peeked into the room to see what was happening. What he saw brought a wide smile to his face. There in the middle of the hall were his trusted guards, laughing, cheering, and fully immersed in the spirit of the game. For once, they weren't bound by protocol or rigid expectations. They were simply people sharing a moment of pure fun. Unable to resist, the king stepped inside, clapping his hands together. "Well, well," he said warmly, addressing the group. "It seems I've stumbled upon quite the show. Who knew my guards had such hidden talents?" The comment prompted another round of laughter, and soon the king himself joined in, taking a seat beside the guards and encouraging them to continue. As the night wore on, barriers between roles and ranks disappeared completely. Footmen high-fived guards, maids whispered jokes to officers, and even the king found himself engaged in friendly banter with those around him. For the guards, this experience was transformative. They realized that stepping away from their usual seriousness didn't diminish their importance. It enriched it. By letting down their guard, so to speak, they formed connections that strengthened the sense of community within the palace. Later, as the celebration wound down and the guards returned to their posts, there was a noticeable shift in their demeanor. Though they resumed their formal stances, their eyes held a new light, a reminder of the bond they now shared with the people they served alongside. That night became a cherished memory, not just for the guards but for everyone involved. It proved that even in a world steeped in tradition, there was always room for moments of levity and connection. And so, the annual staff celebration became known not only for its food and festivities, but also for the heartwarming sight of royal guards letting loose and showing their human side. It was a reminder that beneath every uniform beats a heart capable of laughter, and that sometimes breaking character is exactly what brings people closer together. The palace had always been a place of grandeur and celebration, but it was also no stranger to moments of sorrow. When news of the passing of Lord Harrington, a beloved royal advisor, reached the household, a somber cloud settled over the grounds. Lord Harrington had served the royal family for decades, offering wisdom and guidance with a kindness that endeared him to everyone, from the king himself to the youngest kitchen maid. His absence left a void that no words could fill. As mourners gathered in the chapel for a private service, Lady Margaret, Lord Harrington's granddaughter, sat quietly in the front pew. Her hands were clasped tightly together, her face pale and streaked with tears. Though she tried to remain composed, the weight of her grief was too much to bear. She slipped out of the chapel midway through the service, unable to stay inside any longer. Outside, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of rain. Margaret wandered toward the gardens, seeking solace among the familiar paths where she had often walked with her grandfather. But even here, memories surrounded her: the bench where they used to sit, the rose bushes he had admired, and each one brought fresh waves of sadness. Nearby, a young guard named Daniel stood watch by the garden gate. He had seen Lady Margaret leave the chapel, her shoulders trembling as she walked away. Something about her quiet anguish moved him deeply. Breaking protocol, he stepped forward, his boots crunching softly against the gravel path. "Lady Margaret," he said gently, his voice barely above a whisper. Startled, Margaret turned to face him, her eyes red and swollen. For a moment, she didn't speak, unsure of why the guard had approached her. Sensing her confusion, Daniel hesitated before reaching into his pocket and pulling out a neatly folded handkerchief. It was simple, white linen with his initials embroidered in the corner, but it carried an unspoken message of comfort. "Please," he said softly, holding it out to her. "Take this. I know it won't fix anything, but maybe it will help." Margaret stared at him, surprised by the gesture. Guards were not supposed to interact with members of the royal household unless spoken to first, let alone offer personal items. Yet there was no hesitation in Daniel's expression, only sincerity. Slowly, she reached out and took the handkerchief, her fingers brushing lightly against his. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice breaking slightly. She dabbed at her tears, feeling a small measure of relief wash over her. They stood there in silence for a few moments, the world around them fading into the background. Finally, Margaret spoke again. "He was like a father to me," she confessed quietly, nodding toward the direction of the chapel. "I don't know how to say goodbye." Daniel nodded, understanding more than she might have realized. "Grief is hard," he replied simply, "but you're not alone. Everyone here loved him too." His words were plain, yet they carried a depth of empathy that touched Margaret deeply. She managed a weak smile before turning to walk back toward the chapel, clutching the handkerchief tightly in her hand. Weeks later, Daniel received a letter delivered discreetly to his quarters. It was from Lady Margaret, written in elegant script on creamy stationery. In it, she thanked him for his kindness during her darkest hour and expressed how much his gesture had meant to her. The handkerchief, she wrote, now rested in a special box alongside other mementos of her grandfather. A reminder that even in loss, there were still acts of compassion that brought light to the shadows. From that day forward, Daniel kept the letter tucked safely in his uniform pocket, close to his heart. It served as a reminder of the impact a single act of kindness could have, not just on others, but on himself as well. And though he returned to his duties with the same dedication as before, there was a new softness in his gaze, a subtle acknowledgement that behind every uniform lay a human being capable of making someone's burden just a little bit lighter. In the days and weeks that followed, stories of Daniel's gesture spread quietly among the palace staff. It became a symbol of the power of connection, a testament to the idea that even in the most formal settings, moments of genuine humanity could shine through. And for Lady Margaret, the memory of that rainy afternoon in the garden remained a source of comfort, proof that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness leave the deepest impressions. Over time, the small but heartfelt moments shared between the royal guards and the royal family began to reshape the atmosphere within the palace walls. What had once been a place defined by rigid traditions and unspoken rules started to feel warmer, more human. The guards, who had long been seen as stoic figures bound by duty, were now recognized for their ability to offer kindness, humor, and even comfort when it was needed most. These acts of connection didn't weaken the institution they served, they strengthened it. For the royal family, these interactions became cherished memories that reminded them of the humanity behind the uniforms. Princess Charlotte often spoke fondly of James, the guard who had carried her to safety after her kite-flying mishap. "He's my favorite," she would declare during family dinners, much to the amusement of her parents. Even Queen Eleanor, known for her poise and decorum, couldn't help but smile when recalling Samuel's impromptu serenade during the snowy caroling event. "It's not every day you hear a guard sing like an angel," she remarked once, earning nods of agreement from those around her. The guards themselves also experienced a shift in perspective. No longer did they see their roles as purely ceremonial or detached. Each act of breaking character, whether it was accepting a flower from a child, assisting Prince Henry with his books, or sharing laughter over a game of charades, reminded them that they were part of something greater than just standing watch. They weren't merely protectors. They were contributors to the life and spirit of the palace. This newfound understanding fostered a sense of mutual respect between the guards and the royal household. When Lady Margaret wrote her heartfelt letter to Daniel, thanking him for his gesture during her time of grief, it wasn't just gratitude, it was acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that guards weren't faceless figures, but individuals capable of empathy and compassion. This sentiment spread throughout the ranks, inspiring others to find subtle ways to connect without compromising their duties. Even King George noticed the change. During one of his morning walks through the gardens, he paused to observe a group of children giggling as they tried to make a guard laugh. The guard stood tall, maintaining his composure, but there was a twinkle in his eye that betrayed his amusement. The king chuckled softly to himself, realizing that these moments were becoming a natural part of palace life. Tradition is important, he later told his advisors, but so is the humanity that breathes life into it. As seasons changed and years passed, stories of these heartwarming encounters became part of the palace's lore. Tourists visiting the grounds whispered about the singing guard or the kite hero, while staff members reminisced about the night guards joined in charades. These tales added layers to the rich history of the royal family, showing that even amidst grandeur and protocol, there was room for simple, genuine connections. Ultimately, the bond between the guards and the royal family proved that tradition and humanity could coexist harmoniously. Breaking character didn't mean abandoning duty. It meant finding balance. It meant remembering that beneath every uniform beats a heart capable of warmth, kindness, and joy. And as long as those hearts continued to shine through, even in fleeting, unexpected ways, the legacy of the palace would remain not just one of power and prestige, but of love and shared humanity. In the end, everyone learned that true strength lies not in rigidity, but in the courage to soften when the moment calls for it. And in doing so, both the guards and the royal family discovered something invaluable: the beauty of being human together.